She fought to resist, but the force of his presence, a storm contained within a man of impossible power, threatened to shatter her carefully built walls. A forbidden pull, terrifying and undeniable, ignited where worlds should never collide. Hello, and a warm welcome. I'm Morgan, your storyteller, and I hope this message finds you well. Before we dive into this incredible journey, if you crave romance that feels achingly real, love that sparks against all odds, and soul-stirring connections that linger long after the final word, you're in the perfect place. This unforgettable tale of transformative passion will stay with you. Trust me, every single moment is worth it. So subscribe now, and let's begin this breathtaking journey together. Chapter 1. The city sprawled beneath Silas Thorne, like a circuit board, viewed from orbit, its lights bleeding into the perpetual haze that clung to the upper floors of the Elysian Grand. Up here, in the penthouse area, the world was reduced to geometry and absolute control. Polished chrome reflected the city's cold glow onto vast expanses of flawless, chilled marble. Recessed lighting hummed a sterile tune barely audible over the profound silence. The air tasted of filtered nothingness, scented faintly with ozone and the expensive, arid leather of his chair. Silence reigned, thick and absolute, broken only by the precise tick-tock of a minimalist clock, a metronome for his meticulously ordered existence. Silas stood at the floor-to-ceiling window, a silhouette against the glittering sprawl, his reflection a stark, controlled counterpoint to the chaotic life beyond the glass. 45 years of relentless ambition had forged him into this, the undisputed king of a cold, luxurious empire. Control wasn't just a strategy, it was his oxygen, his fortress walls. Down below, in the beating, artificial heart of the Elysian, the air vibrated with a different, curated energy. The hum of low conversation, the crystalline clink of glasses, the soft, sophisticated strains of a jazz quartet. It was a carefully orchestrated symphony of wealth and leisure. Celeste, the rooftop bar, was a jewel box suspended above the city, all plush velvet banquets, low lighting that gilded the patrons, and a breathtaking panoramic view of the captive metropolis. Tonight, it thrummed with the subdued buzz of the privileged, a world Nicole Finch navigated, like a creature displaced from its natural habitat. Her uniform, a sleek black sheath that looked effortless on the other waitresses, seemed to cling with a hint of defiance on Nicole. It hinted at curves more accustomed to worn denim and sun-warmed cotton shirts. Her hands, capable and bearing the subtle strength honed by years tending the Finch family orchard, handled the heavy crystal tumblers and silver trays with a surprising innate grace, yet an underlying tension radiated from her shoulders. Percy was moonlighting, a necessity driven by the orchard's precarious finances, a universe away from the scent of loam and ripening apples. Here, the air was thick with expensive competing perfumes and the faint, acrid tang of cigar smoke drifting from the terrace. Her gaze, wide and the color of storm-washed slate, took everything in, the calculated nonchalance of the wealthy, the predatory gleam in some eyes, the sheer intimidating weight of so much polished opulence. She felt like a wild flower pressed between the pages of a gilded ledger, vibrant but out of place. Delivering a perfectly balanced martini to a table of laughing socialites, her peripheral vision snagged on him. He sat shrouded in the deepest corner shadow of Celeste, a pool of absolute stillness amidst the gentle chaos, not hiding precisely, but existing in a self-imposed exile. Silas Thorne, even without consciously knowing his name, his presence radiated a low, thrumming authority. He wore his power like a second skin, evident in the immaculate cut of his charcoal suit, the sharp, clean line of his jaw, the stillness that seemed to absorb the light and sound around him. He held a tumbler of amber liquid, untouched for long moments, his gaze fixed on some invisible point beyond the glass barrier, seeing not the city, but perhaps the intricate, ruthless machinery of his own dominion, or the hollow echo within it. He looked carved from obsidian, beautiful, remote, and utterly untouchable. Exhaustion etched fine lines around his eyes, a vulnerability so fleeting Nicole wondered if she'd imagined it. A shiver, unrelated to the air conditioning, traced her spine. Her tray now blessedly empty, she approached his shadowed enclave. The ambient noise seemed to dampen, replaced by the sudden loud thud of her own heartbeat in her ears. "Another whiskey, sir." Her voice emerged softer than intended, husky from the long shift, yet clear in the pocket of quiet surrounding him. His head turned slowly, deliberately, his eyes, the color of glacial ice under a merciless winter sky, fixed on her. The intensity was a physical thing, a sudden compression of the air in her lungs. They swept over her face, lingering for a fraction of a second too long on the smattering of sun-kissed freckles dusting the bridge of her nose, a legacy of orchard life, before dipping to the simple black name tag pinned above her heart. Nicole, a flicker, unreadable and unnerving, passed through those frozen depths. "Neat," he confirmed, his voice a low rumble, like distant thunder rolling over mountains. It vibrated along her nerves. She nodded, turning swiftly towards the gleaming bar to retrieve the bottle of obscenely expensive single malt reserved for discerning palates and bottomless expense accounts. Pouring the precise measure required intense focus. She felt the weight of his gaze still on her, a tangible heat on the nape of her neck, between her shoulder blades. The silence stretched, thick with something potent and unnameable. As she placed the fresh glass before him, careful not to let the heavy crystal clink too loudly against the marble tabletop, a stray lock of her honey-brown hair, escaping its practical knot, brushed against her cheekbone. "Long night," the question slipped out before she could censor it. Reckless, crossing an invisible heavily guarded line in this place of curated distance and unspoken hierarchies. One dark eyebrow arched infinitesimally. He lifted the glass, swirling the rich liquid, watching the viscous legs slide down the crystal with detached fascination. "Define long," he murmured, the ghost of something amusement, profound weariness, briefly touching his lips. Time becomes elastic when measured in hostile acquisitions and tedious appeasements. He took a slow sip, the whiskey catching the low light like trapped fire. His gaze returned to hers, sharp, assessing. "You're new to Celeste," a statement, not a question. Nicole felt a flush creep up her neck, warm against the bar's cool air. "A few weeks, sir." Covering a shift, she smoothed a non-existent wrinkle on her dress, a nervous gesture. "Covering." He repeated the word, tasting it, turning it over. "And what, pray tell, do you cover from?" The question was delivered with deceptive mildness, but the glacial eyes held a sharp, unnerving curiosity, a predator scenting unfamiliar territory. She hesitated. Revealing the orchard felt like exposing something tender, real, and deeply personal to this polished, intimidating force of nature. "A family business," she offered, the vagueness a shield. "Outside the city, requires sun." She gestured vaguely upwards, though only the bar's ceiling met the gesture. He took another deliberate sip, the pastoral idyll, apples perhaps. His gaze dropped pointedly to her hands, resting lightly on the edge of his table. They were capable hands, nails short and clean, but undeniably bearing the faintest trace of dark earth under one nail, a tiny pale scar near the thumb knuckle, trophies of the land. "You smell of sunshine," he stated, matter-of-factly, no hint of flirtation, just stark observation. "And turned earth, an anomaly in this refrigerated mausoleum." Nicole's breath hitched. It wasn't a compliment delivered with charm, but an observation, unsettlingly accurate. Her usual scent of orchard warmth and honest sweat did feel profoundly incongruous here, a scent signature declaring her an outsider. "Refrigerated mausoleum," she repeated softly, a spark of unexpected defiance flickering in her storm-gray eyes. "Is that the official branding? I must have missed that brochure." The words were out, sharp and dry, the kind of wit that surfaced among the apple trees back home, before she could stop them. A beat of absolute silence, heavy. Then something remarkable happened. A corner of Silas Thorne's mouth quirked upwards, just a fraction, a hairline crack appearing in the obsidian facade, revealing a glimpse of something alive and unexpectedly compelling beneath. "Touché," he murmured, the low rumble carrying a new surprising warmth. He raised his glass slightly in her direction, a minimal salute. Perhaps the mausoleum needs more wild flowers. To offset the formaldehyde, her own lips twitched in response, a genuine startled reaction she couldn't suppress. A tiny, almost imperceptible smile. The shared moment, fragile and electrically charged, hung suspended between them. The air crackled, the hum of the bar, the clinking glasses, the murmured conversations fading into insignificance. His gaze held hers, the glacial ice seeming to thaw infinitesimally at the edges, revealing a depth of focus that was both exhilarating and terrifying. He saw her, truly saw her, the girl from the orchard, the anomaly in his pristine world. And in that seeing, Nicole felt a dangerous pull, a magnetic force emanating from his contained intensity, a current threatening to sweep her off her known path. The spell shattered as another waiter urgently signaled her from across the room. She blinked, pulling her gaze away with an effort that felt physical, like tearing Velcro. "Enjoy your whiskey, sir," she managed, her voice slightly breathless, the flush now blooming fully on her cheeks. He merely inclined his head, the ghost of that near smile still playing on his lips as he watched her walk away. The scent of sunshine and damp earth trailed faintly behind her, an olfactory signature lingering in the sterile air of his shadowed corner. Silas Thorne stared into his whiskey, the amber liquid suddenly holding far less appeal than the memory of startled gray eyes, the flash of defiance, the scent of something real. The familiar numbing oblivion he craved remained frustratingly out of reach, replaced by an unwelcome prickling awareness he couldn't dismiss. Hours bled into one another, the rhythm of the bar continuing its practiced dance. Nicole moved through her duties, taking orders, delivering drinks, clearing tables, but the encounter replayed in her mind like a vivid, disconcerting film reel. The intensity of his gaze, the low rumble of his voice that seemed to resonate in her bones, the startling near smile that transformed his austere beauty into something breathtaking. He remained in his shadowed corner, a silent, magnetic presence she found herself subtly orbiting, her path through the room unconsciously bending towards his vicinity. She felt his eyes on her as she served other tables, a warm prickle on her skin, a constant awareness humming beneath her surface. Once, catching his reflection in the polished brass of a service station, she saw him watching her, his expression unreadable but intensely focused, like a strategist observing an unexpected variable. A fresh wave of warmth flooded her cheeks. It was absurd. He was a titan inhabiting a stratosphere she couldn't fathom. She was a temporary waitress who smelled of dirt and desperation. Yet the current between them, silent and undeniable, refused to dissipate. Outside, the city's glittering facade began to fracture. A low, ominous growl of thunder rolled across the sky, distant at first but resonating deep in the building's bones. The jazz quartet, sensing the shift, packed up their instruments with unseemly haste. Patrons glanced towards the panoramic windows as the first fat, heavy drops of rain splattered against the glass like thrown pebbles, quickly multiplying into a frenzied deafening drumming. The wind, previously a gentle sigh, roared to life, howling around the building's pinnacle, rattling the expensive terrace furniture with violent abandon. The carefully curated atmosphere of Celeste fractured into anxious murmurs, and the sudden scramble for coats and prematurely summoned cars. Chaos reigned in the cramped service elevator lobby. Staff milled, damp and harried, waiting for the main guest elevators to clear the departing crowd. Rain lashed the glass walls in near horizontal sheets, turning the dazzling city lights below into smears of watery color. Nicole huddled near the back, arms wrapped around herself, shivering slightly in the aggressively air-conditioned space, despite the humid fugue of damp bodies. The exhaustion of the long shift seeped into her bones, a deep ache. She just wanted the quiet dark of the orchard farmhouse, the familiar creak of old wood, the scent of apples stored in the cellar. Anything but this glittering pressurized cage. The charged encounter with Silas Thorne felt like a surreal dream receding under the onslaught of the storm. Then he was there. He materialized from a private corridor, bypassing the crowded main staff area. His presence, even amidst the chaos, commanded an immediate instinctive hush. Staff subtly shifted, creating space. He was imposing, impeccably tailored even now, his expression unreadable but radiating an aura of absolute authority that cut through the panic. His glacial eyes scanned the huddled group, dismissing most until they landed on her, tucked against the cold wall. Recognition, sharp and immediate, flared in his gaze. He didn't approach the group. Instead he stopped near the discreet brushed steel door of a private elevator Nicole hadn't even noticed before. He held a keycard, his movements economical. The door slid open silently, revealing an opulent, mirrored interior. His gaze locked onto hers again, across the crowded space. He didn't speak, he didn't gesture, he simply held her gaze, an unspoken command radiating from him, an invitation, or an order. The crack in his fortress wall from earlier seemed to widen into a doorway. The storm raged outside, trapping them. The service elevators were overwhelmed. The choice was stark: remain stranded indefinitely in this chaotic limbo, or step into the unknown with him. Heart hammering against her ribs, a reckless spark ignited by the storm, the exhaustion, and the lingering intensity of his attention. Nicole made her decision. She pushed away from the wall, ignoring the curious glances of her colleagues, and walked towards the open elevator. The air seemed to crackle around her as she neared him. She caught his scent, sandalwood, clean linen, and something else, metallic and sharp, like ozone after lightning. He stepped aside, allowing her to enter first. She did, her sensible waitress shoes sinking into the plush, dove-gray carpet. He followed, the door sealing them in with a soft, definitive hiss. The noise of the storm, the chaos, the staff lobby, all vanished, replaced by an absolute pressurized silence and the faint hum of machinery. The elevator began its smooth, swift ascent. They stood apart. He faced the mirrored door. She stared resolutely at her own reflection, pale and wide-eyed. The mirrors multiplied their images to infinity, the imposing, controlled billionaire, and the disheveled waitress smelling of rain and apples. The silence wasn't merely the absence of sound, it was a physical entity, thick with the unspoken tension of the bar, the storm and the sheer insanity of her being here. She could feel the heat radiating from him, a stark contrast to the elevator's cool air. He didn't look at her reflection, but his awareness of her was palpable, a live wire humming between them. The numbers above the door climbed silently, marking their ascent into his isolated kingdom. The doors opened directly into a space that stole Nicole's breath. Silas Thorne's penthouse was vast, cold, breathtakingly minimalist. Polished concrete floors stretched towards floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a terrifying, magnificent view of the storm. Lightning fractured the bruised sky, illuminating the city below in stark, stuttering flashes. Thunder boomed, shaking the glass, a primal counterpoint to the sterile silence within. The air was cooler still, scented faintly with sandalwood and that underlying metallic sharpness she'd noticed earlier. There were no personal touches, no photographs, no clutter, only sleek furniture that looked sculpted rather than lived in. It felt less like a home and more like a perfectly curated museum exhibit, a monument to control. The only sound was the muffled fury of the storm and their own breathing, suddenly loud in the echoing space. Silas moved past her, his footsteps silent on the concrete. He went to a sleek bar cart, poured 2 glasses of water from a crystal decanter, and brought one to her. His fingers brushed hers as he handed it over. The contact was brief, electric. A jolt shot up her arm. "Storm caught everyone off guard," he said, his voice low, almost conversational, yet it resonated in the vast quiet. He took a sip from his own glass, his gaze fixed on the tempest outside. The city looks different from up here when it rages, contained, almost beautiful in its fury. Nicole clutched the cool glass, her knuckles white. She took a sip, the water tasteless. "It's overwhelming," she admitted, her voice small. She wasn't sure if she meant the storm or the penthouse or his proximity. Probably all three. He turned his head slowly, looking at her properly for the first time since they'd entered. The glacial eyes held a different quality now, not assessing, but absorbing, taking in her rain-dampened hair escaping its knot,
the flush still high on her cheeks, the way her uniform seemed even more incongruous against his stark backdrop. He saw the faint tremor in her hand holding the glass. He saw the wild flower, displaced and trembling. "It is," he agreed, his voice softening almost imperceptibly. He took a step closer. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with the storm's energy, and something else, potent and dangerous, overwhelming. Another step, the scent of him intensified, sandalwood, clean linen, that sharp, metallic tang, and now, underlying it, the faintest trace of the whiskey. He reached out, not touching her, but his hand hovered near the stray lock of hair plastered to her temple by the rain. His gaze held hers, an unspoken question blazing in the frozen depths. The control, the fortress walls, they seemed to waver, revealing a raw, hungry vulnerability beneath. The silence wasn't empty now, it screamed with tension, with the echo of their earlier charged exchange in the bar, with the forbidden pull that had drawn her into this elevator. Nicole stood frozen, caught in the cross-currents. The rational part screamed to retreat, to find the elevator button, to flee this gilded cage and the terrifying intensity of the man before her. But another part, awakened by his unexpected near smile, his sharp observation, the sheer magnetic force of his presence, and the reckless energy of the storm, thrummed with a dangerous answering chord. She didn't step back. She held his gaze, her storm-gray eyes wide, reflecting the lightning flashes, filled with a tumult of fear, confusion, and a dawning terrifying curiosity. The wild flower didn't wilt, it tilted its face towards the unpredictable, consuming heat. The space between them vanished, not with words but with a gravitational pull too strong to resist. His hand, no longer hovering, cupped her cheek. His touch was cool at first, then searing. His other hand found the small of her back, drawing her against him. The kiss wasn't gentle, it was a collision, of loneliness, of exhaustion, of a hunger for something real, and the terrifying exhilarating spark that had ignited between the whiskey and the wild flower. It was wordless, intense, desperate, a surrender not just of bodies, but of the carefully constructed barriers both had erected against the world. Later, much later, dawn painted the city in cold, clear light. The storm had passed, leaving a washed clean sky and a deceptive calm. Nicole woke in the vast unfamiliar bed, tangled in impossibly soft cool linen. Silas Thorne slept beside her, the harsh lines of his face softened in sleep, the Obsidian King momentarily unguarded. The events of the night, the charged conversation, the storm, the wordless intensity of their connection, crashed over her with the force of the vanished thunder. The sterile perfection of the penthouse, the sheer magnitude of who he was, the anonymity of their encounter that now felt terrifyingly intimate. It coalesced into a suffocating wave of panic. This world, this man, it wasn't hers. The intimacy, profound and shattering, felt like a beautiful, dangerous dream from which she needed to wake before it consumed her. Moving with silent urgency, heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, she slipped from the bed. She gathered her discarded uniform, her fingers fumbling with the buttons. She didn't look back at the sleeping figure. She couldn't. Dressed, she paused only for a second at the imposing front door, finding it unlocked. As she stepped back into the private elevator, the scent of sandalwood and clean linen clung to her skin, mingling with the lingering warmth of him. But beneath it, faint but persistent, was the scent of her own world, sunshine and apples. She fled, disappearing into the awakening city, as the first rays of sun struck the Elysian's pinnacle, leaving behind only the faint impossible fragrance of wild flowers in a refrigerated mausoleum, and the profound silence of an unexpected absence.
Chapter 2. Weeks bled into the rhythm of the orchard. Spring deepened, painting the Hudson Valley in vibrant greens and the delicate blush of apple blossoms. The air hummed with bees drunk on nectar, thick with the heady, sweet perfume that drifted from the Finch family trees like a visible sigh. Sunlight, warm and forgiving, soaked into Nicole's skin as she knelt in the rich, dark earth, carefully pruning a young Honeycrisp sapling. The physicality of the work, the scrape of bark against her calloused palms, the satisfying snip of the shears, the deep loamy scent filling her lungs, was a grounding balm, or it was supposed to be. The memory of the storm, the penthouse, him clung like stubborn burrs to the fabric of her thoughts. It surfaced at odd moments, the cool slide of linen sheets against her skin, as she made her own bed in the creaking farmhouse, the sudden scent of rain on hot pavement, the low rumble of distant thunder that sent an unwelcome shiver down her spine. She'd buried it deep, this beautiful, terrifying mistake. She told herself it was anonymous, a collision of loneliness and storm energy, utterly disconnected from her reality. He was Silas Thorne, the untouchable king of his glass and steel empire. She was Nicole Finch, whose world was defined by rootstock, blossom set, and the constant gnawing worry over the bank notices piling up on the chipped kitchen table. Her father, Tom, a man whose face seemed permanently etched with the lines of the land and its struggles, shuffled down the row towards her, his gait stiff. He held a single sheet of paper, crisp and official-looking, starkly white against the backdrop of burgeoning green life. His expression, usually guarded optimism, was bleak. "Nick," he said, his voice rough, "came today." Nicole wiped sweat from her brow with the back of her hand, leaving a smudge of earth. She stood, brushing dirt from her worn jeans, a familiar knot tightening in her stomach. "The bank." The words felt heavy. Tom nodded, handing her the notice. The stark black letters screamed final notice, foreclosure proceedings. The amount owed was a mountain, insurmountable after 2 bad harvests and rising costs. The date for action loomed, a guillotine blade suspended over their heads, over the trees her great-grandfather had planted. The scent of blossoms suddenly felt cloying, suffocating. The vibrant green world seemed to dim. This was her reality, tangible, crushing. "It's over then," she whispered, the paper trembling in her hand. The dream of salvaging the orchard, of holding on to this piece of earth that was her soul, seemed to evaporate like morning mist. Tom sighed, a sound like dry leaves skittering across stone. "Unless a miracle walks through the gate, Nick. Looks like the Thorne Corporation gets another parcel for their next golf course or whatever monstrosity they build." He spat the name Thorne like it was a bad taste. The Elysian Group, Silas's empire, was known for acquiring land, transforming vibrant places into sanitized experiences. The thought of bulldozers ripping through the blossoming trees, paving over the rich earth, was a physical pain. Nicole folded the notice, the sharp creases mirroring the fracture in her heart. She shoved it into her back pocket, the paper a cold brand against her skin. I'll go into town, see if Hank at the feed store knows anything. Maybe someone's looking for land." Her voice lacked conviction. Miracles didn't happen to Finch orchards. Later that afternoon, the crunch of gravel under expensive tires was an alien sound at the end of their long potholed driveway. Nicole, hauling a bucket of pruning debris towards the compost heap, froze. A sleek black sedan, polished to a mirror shine that reflected the orchard's green chaos, purred to a stop just inside the rusted iron gate. It looked like a predator that had wandered into a meadow. Her breath hitched. City cars rarely came this far out, especially not ones that cost more than their entire annual yield. The driver's door opened, and a man in a dark suit emerged, scanning the property with impersonal efficiency. He opened the rear passenger door, and he stepped out. Silas Thorne. He looked impossibly out of place. The perfectly tailored charcoal suit, the gleaming Oxford shoes, the aura of contained, formidable power. They belonged on marble floors, not sun-baked gravel strewn with fallen petals. He surveyed the scene, the weathered farmhouse with its peeling paint, the slightly sagging barn, the rows of blossoming trees stretching towards the hills. His expression was unreadable, a mask of cool assessment. Then his glacial gaze swept across the yard and landed on her. Recognition slammed into Nicole with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just recognition. It was an instantaneous, visceral reliving of the storm, the penthouse, the searing intimacy. Her hands tightened on the rough wooden handle of the bucket, knuckles white. The scent of apple blossoms suddenly felt sharp, overwhelming. She saw the exact moment it hit him too. His posture, usually ramrod straight, stiffened almost imperceptibly. The cool assessment in his eyes vanished, replaced by a shock so profound it momentarily fractured his impassive mask. His gaze locked onto hers, intense, searching, stripping away the anonymity she desperately clung to. He knew exactly who she was, the wild flower he'd found in his mausoleum. He recovered swiftly, the mask snapping back into place, but it was different now, colder, harder. Or perhaps it was just the shock of seeing her here, in her natural habitat, covered in dirt and sweat, wielding a bucket of pruned branches. He took a step forward, his expensive shoes crunching decisively on the gravel. His driver remained by the car, a silent sentinel. Miss Finch. His voice, that low rumble she remembered vibrating in her bones, was carefully modulated, devoid of the near warmth she'd glimpsed at Celeste. It was pure business. Nicole forced herself to stand straighter, to meet that piercing gaze. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Mr. Thorne. She didn't ask what he was doing there. The foreclosure notice burned in her pocket. He was the architect of their ruin, walking onto the condemned property. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she caught his scent, sandalwood, clean linen, that sharp metallic tang, cutting through the sweet orchard air like an intrusion. His gaze swept over her again, taking in her muddy boots, the worn flannel shirt tied at her waist, the smudge of earth on her cheekbone. It was a different kind of seeing than in the bar, more invasive, more possessive. I understand there are some financial difficulties regarding this property, he stated, his tone detached, as if discussing a distant spreadsheet. He didn't mention the notice. He didn't need to. His presence screamed it. Nicole's chin lifted. Defiance, born of despair, sparked. Difficulties. That's one word for it. The bank prefers terminal. She gestured vaguely towards the house. We got the notice today. Congratulations. Prime real estate for your next, what was it? Refrigerated mausoleum. The bitterness seeped through, laced with the dry wit he'd once acknowledged. A flicker, almost imperceptible, in his icy eyes. Was it annoyance, or something else? The Elysian Group has diverse holdings, Miss Finch, he replied smoothly, ignoring her jab. Development potential is assessed based on numerous factors. His gaze drifted past her, over the rows of blossoming trees, the rolling hills beyond. It is picturesque. Picturesque doesn't pay the bank, Nicole retorted, the spark flaring. It's our home, our livelihood, not just potential. She saw his jaw tighten minutely. Good. Let him see the reality behind his acquisition. He finally met her eyes again, his gaze intense, probing. And what would you propose to save this livelihood? The question hung in the air, loaded. Was it genuine curiosity, a cruel taunt, or something else entirely? Nicole's breath caught. What could she propose? Bake sales. A miracle apparently, she said, her voice tight. But those seem in short supply around here. Silas Thorne regarded her for a long silent moment. The air crackled between them, thick with the unspoken past and the crushing weight of the present. The scent of blossoms and turned earth mingled uneasily with his expensive cologne. He seemed to be weighing something, his gaze tracing the line of her jaw, the defiant set of her shoulders. Then, without another word, he gave a curt nod, turned on his heel, and walked back to the waiting car. The door closed with a soft, expensive thud. The engine purred to life, and the black sedan reversed down the driveway, disappearing as abruptly as it had arrived, leaving only disturbed gravel and the lingering, unsettling scent of sandalwood. Nicole stood frozen, the bucket handle biting into her palm. The encounter had lasted minutes, yet it felt like an earthquake. He knew, and he was the one wielding the axe. The fragile piece she'd tried to build since fleeing the penthouse lay shattered. The orchard's fate, already bleak, now felt intimately tied to the most dangerous man she'd ever met. The miracle arrived 3 days later, a single crisp letter from the bank, bearing an unfamiliar corporate seal. The foreclosure proceedings were halted. The debt paid in full by an anonymous entity listed only as Horizon Holdings. Tom whooped, crushing Nicole in a rare fierce hug. Relief, sweet and dizzying, flooded her. The orchard was saved, but Nicole stood frozen amidst the celebration, the letter trembling in her hand. Anonymous entity. Horizon Holdings. The words echoed in the hollow space where her relief should have been. She knew, with a cold, terrifying certainty, she knew. Silas Thorne. The scent of sandalwood seemed to rise from the paper. Why? Guilt. Payment for services rendered. A cruel game. The question became a constant hum beneath the surface of her daze. Louder than the bees in the blossoms, she threw herself back into the orchard work with renewed, almost frantic energy, trying to bury the unease, the confusing pull of gratitude mixed with profound distrust. But the city, and the man who ruled a piece of it, wasn't done with her. The Elysian Grand required its tribute. A special order of Finch Orchard's limited edition early bloom cider, reserved for a high-profile investor dinner. Nicole couldn't refuse. The contract, now mysteriously secure, demanded it. Dread coiled in her stomach as she loaded the crates into the farm's battered pickup truck. Returning to the mausoleum felt like walking into the lion's den. The service entrance of the Elysian was a world away from the orchard's sun-drenched chaos. Sterile, efficient, humming with the constant low thrum of machinery and hushed voices. The air tasted of disinfectant and chilled concrete. Nicole, in clean but worn jeans and a simple t-shirt, her hair escaping a loose braid, felt the stares of the impeccably uniformed staff as she maneuvered the hand truck loaded with cider crates. An outsider, a peasant delivering tribute, she navigated the labyrinth and corridors towards the main kitchens, her senses assaulted by the shift from loam and blossom to stainless steel and simmering sauces. Polished floors reflected the harsh fluorescent lights, amplifying every sound, the clatter of pans, the sharp commands of the head chef, the whir of a nearby elevator. Then she turned a corner, and the world narrowed. He stood halfway down a narrow service hallway, conferring with his imposing head of security, Marcus. Silas Thorne was a pillar of controlled power, his suit immaculate, his posture radiating command. Marcus nodded sharply at something Silas said, then turned and strode past Nicole without a glance. Silas remained, his back partially turned, studying a tablet in his hand. Nicole froze, the hand truck stopping abruptly. Her heart leaped into her throat, every nerve ending screamed. She could slip back, wait, but the corridor was narrow. To pass him she'd have to brush close, too close. Taking a steadying breath she didn't feel, Nicole gripped the handles and pushed forward. The wheels rumbled softly on the polished floor. As she drew level, he looked up from the tablet. His glacial eyes met hers. Recognition, immediate and intense, flared again, hotter this time. The air crackled, thick with the memory of the orchard, the penthouse, the anonymous payment hanging between them. She angled the hand truck, trying to give him maximum space, but the corridor was unforgiving. As she passed, the rough denim of her jeans brushed against the impossibly fine wool of his tailored trouser leg. As a jolt, electric and undeniable, shot through her. She gasped, a tiny involuntary sound. His hand shot out, not to steady her, but to grasp the edge of the hand truck, halting its motion. His fingers, long and strong, brushed against hers on the handle. Another shockwave. His touch was cool, but it burned. They stood frozen for a heartbeat, trapped in the narrow space, bodies almost touching, eyes locked. The scent of him, sandalwood, clean linen, power, enveloped her, momentarily drowning out the kitchen smells. The silence was deafening, charged with 1,000 unspoken things. The orchard visit, the paid debt, the storm, the kiss. Careful, Miss Finch, he murmured, his voice low, rough around the edges. His gaze held hers, intense, probing. The floors can be treacherous. Was it a warning, or something else? His thumb moved almost imperceptibly against the metal frame near her fingers. Nicole swallowed, forcing herself to meet his gaze. The defiance sparked again,
mixed with the confusing heat his proximity ignited. "Wouldn't want to damage the merchandise, Mr. Thorne," she retorted, her voice steadier than she felt, especially after Horizon Holdings invested so heavily in its source. She let the implication hang. "I know it was you." A flicker crossed his face. Surprise, amusement, approval. It was gone too quickly. His grip on the hand truck tightened for a fraction of a second, his knuckles whitening. Before he released it, he stepped back, granting her space. "Indeed," he said, the single word loaded. His gaze swept over her face, lingering on the stubborn lock of hair falling across her forehead, then dropped pointedly to the cider crates. "See that it reaches the kitchens intact. The vintage is highly anticipated." He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing with finality down the corridor. Nicole leaned against the hand truck for a moment, her legs trembling. The spot where his fingers had brushed hers tingled. The scent of sandalwood lingered. The encounter had lasted seconds, yet it left her shaken, breathless, and more confused than ever. The controlled king was playing a game, and she was perilously out of her depth, yet undeniably, terrifyingly, drawn into it. The dance began, a subtle charged ballet of avoidance and observation within the cold heart of the Elysian. Silas Thorne, the master of control, seemed to be engaged in a ruthless battle with himself. He stopped appearing at Celeste during her shifts. Nicole would catch glimpses of him entering or leaving through private, guarded elevators, bypassing the main thoroughfares, yet his presence became a constant invisible pressure. She would be polishing glasses behind the bar, feeling a prickle on her neck, and look up to see his tall frame reflected in the brass service hatch, standing on a mezzanine level, his gaze fixed on her, not leering, but watching, absorbing. He'd turn away the moment her eyes met his reflection, disappearing like a ghost. Once, delivering fresh linens to a VIP suite floor, she rounded a corner and saw him standing at the far end of a long carpeted hallway. He was framed by a floor-to-ceiling window, looking out, but as her footsteps echoed, his head turned slowly. He didn't acknowledge her, just watched her progress down the hall, his expression unreadable. She felt pinned, exposed, every step an eternity under that glacial scrutiny. By the time she reached the service door near him, he was gone, only the faintest trace of his scent remaining. Nicole found herself doing the same, scanning the lobby when she delivered produce, her gaze instinctively seeking the familiar, imposing figure, feeling a strange leap in her pulse when she spotted him across the vast marble expanse, deep in conversation with associates, yet seemingly aware of her presence. Once, she saw him pause mid-sentence, his head tilting slightly as she passed through the revolving doors into the sunlight. He didn't look, but the pause spoke volumes. The tension wasn't just visual, it was sensory, tactile, olfactory. She was refilling the salt cellars on a quiet afternoon when he passed close behind her chair, not touching, but so near the air displaced by his movement, stirred the fine hairs on her bare arm. The scent of sandalwood and clean linen washed over her, potent and intimate. She froze, salt spilling over the rim of the cellar. He didn't stop, didn't acknowledge the mishap, but she felt the briefest hesitation in his stride. Another time, caught in a sudden downpour while loading empty crates into the pickup behind the hotel, she was drenched in seconds. Shivering, hair plastered to her face, she wrestled with a stubborn crate latch. A shadow fell over her. Silas Thorne stood there, holding a large black umbrella. He didn't speak, he simply held it over her, shielding her from the deluge, while Marcus stood impassively nearby under his own. Rain drummed loudly on the taut fabric. Nicole stared up at him, water dripping from her nose, utterly stunned. His gaze was fixed on her face, tracing the raindrops on her skin, the way her wet shirt clung. The air between them crackled, thick with the drumming rain and unsaid words. He radiated heat. It was an act of bewildering silent care, or possession. She couldn't tell. The moment stretched, charged and fragile. Then, as abruptly as he appeared, he handed the umbrella to Marcus, turned, and walked back into the dry, sterile embrace of the Elysian, leaving her standing in the rain, more confused than ever, clutching the borrowed shield. The most potent moment came unexpectedly. She brought a small crate of early-season apples for the executive lounge, a new, inexplicable request on the Finch Orchard delivery schedule. Leaving the lounge, she passed a low, polished marble bench in a quiet alcove off the main lobby. Distracted, juggling her empty crate and clipboard, she knocked her own small lunch bag off the bench. A single, perfect, sun-warmed gala apple rolled out onto the cool marble floor. Cursing under her breath, she bent to retrieve it. Before she could, a large, impeccably manicured hand closed around the fruit. Silas Thorne stood there, holding her apple. He didn't look at her immediately. He studied the apple, turning it slowly in his long fingers, his thumb brushing over its smooth, blushed skin. The contrast was jarring. The vibrant, imperfect fruit in the hand of a man carved from ice and marble. He lifted it slightly, inhaling its fragrance, a scent utterly alien to the Elysian's filtered air. Sun, soil, life. His eyes closed for a fleeting second. When they opened, they met hers. The icy control was still there, but beneath it, simmering like magma, was a raw, unmistakable hunger. For the apple, for the scent, for her. He held her gaze, the silence stretching, filled only by the distant murmur of the lobby. He didn't offer it back. He simply held it, a tangible connection to her world, to the forbidden. His thumb stroked the skin once more, a slow, deliberate caress that sent heat flooding through Nicole. It felt intensely intimate, more so than any touch they'd shared. It was a silent declaration, a claiming. Forgot something, Miss Finch? His voice was low, rough. The question wasn't about the apple. Nicole couldn't speak. Her mouth was dry. She shook her head mutely, unable to tear her eyes away from the apple in his hand, from the intensity in his. He finally extended his hand, offering it back. Their fingers brushed as she took it. The contact was brief, but the current that passed between them was staggering. The apple felt warm from his touch, imbued with a dangerous energy. "See that it doesn't happen again," he said, his gaze still locked on hers. The words were a command, but the look in his eyes was something else entirely. A challenge, a promise, a fracture widening in his fortress walls. He turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the gleaming lobby, clutching the apple that smelled of sunshine, and bore the invisible imprint of his touch, the scent of sandalwood clinging to the air, and the terrifying knowledge that the slow burn was rapidly consuming every barrier they'd tried to build. The resolve for both of them was crumbling.
Chapter 3. Summer draped the Hudson Valley in a cloak of humid green, but within the Elysian Grand, the season was an air-conditioned abstraction. Tonight, the hotel pulsed with a different kind of heat, the glittering, contained fire of the annual Elysian Foundation Gala. Crystal chandeliers blazed, refracting light onto acres of polished marble. Women in couture gowns shimmered like exotic fish in an aquarium. Men in tailored tuxedos formed constellations of power and privilege. The air thrummed with the murmur of high-stakes conversation, the clink of champagne flutes, and the smooth, sophisticated strains of a hired orchestra. It was Silas Thorne's world, meticulously curated, flawlessly executed, a testament to his dominion over the cold, beautiful machinery of luxury. Nicole moved through the opulent ballroom like a ghost haunting a palace. Her uniform, a stark black dress simpler than the finery around her, yet still feeling like a costume, marked her as staff. She circulated with a tray of champagne flutes, her gaze lowered, a phantom navigating a dreamscape that wasn't hers. The scent of expensive perfume, cigar smoke from the terrace, and rich food was a cloying assault after the orchard's clean air. Every glimpse of gleaming black hair, every imposing silhouette, sent a jolt through her, but it was never him. He was the epicenter, constantly surrounded, a dark star drawing lesser celestial bodies into his orbit. She saw him near the stage, accepting an award with a few clipped, perfectly modulated words, his expression the familiar mask of cool authority. Untouchable, the king secure in his gilded fortress. She felt his presence though, like a physical pressure, a low hum beneath the gala's surface noise. It was in the way conversation subtly shifted as he passed, the deferential nods, the invisible current of power that flowed around him. She felt it on her skin, a phantom awareness that made her fingers tighten on the chilled stem of a champagne flute. The memory of his touch in the narrow corridor, the scent of sandalwood clinging to her apple, the raw hunger in his eyes. They were shards of glass embedded in the carefully constructed wall she'd tried to rebuild since the orchard payment. The slow burn wasn't slow anymore. It was a smoldering ache, fanned by proximity, and the sheer impossibility of their worlds colliding like this. Hours bled into one another. The gala swirled on, a relentless tide of artificial gaiety. Nicole's feet ached in the unfamiliar heels. The constant smile she plastered on felt brittle, ready to crack. The orchestra played a waltz, the music swirling, elegant and utterly soulless. She delivered a flute to a laughing group, catching a glimpse of Silas across the room. He was deep in conversation with a silver-haired industrialist, his profile sharp, controlled, but even from this distance, she saw the tension in the line of his jaw, the slight rigidity in his posture. He looked like a man holding a mountain on his shoulders. The sight stirred something complex within her, a flicker of unwelcome empathy beneath the resentment and confusion. The king looked weary in his castle, needing air, needing escape from the suffocating glitter. Nicole slipped through a discreet service door she'd noticed earlier. It led into a smaller, deserted conservatory, a glass jewel box attached to the main ballroom. Moonlight streamed through the arched windows, silvering the leaves of exotic ferns and palms, glinting off the glass panels. The air here was cooler, quieter, scented with damp earth and the faint perfume of night-blooming orchids. The muffled sounds of the gala felt distant, dreamlike. Relief washed over her, cool and immediate. She leaned against the cool glass wall, closing her eyes, breathing deeply. Then she saw it. Nestled amidst the lush greenery, almost hidden by a large fiddle-leaf fig, stood a grand piano. Its polished ebony surface gleamed softly in the moonlight. It looked ancient, out of place in this modern annex, perhaps a relic from the hotel's grander past. Nicole hadn't touched a piano in years, not since the old upright in the farmhouse parlor, its keys yellowed and slightly stiff. But the sight of it, here in this quiet sanctuary, called to a deep, forgotten part of her. The tension of the night, the relentless pressure of Silas's unseen presence, the gnawing confusion, it all coalesced into a desperate need for something real, something hers. She crossed the moon-dappled floor, her footsteps silent on the cool tile. She ran her fingers lightly over the smooth, cool wood of the piano lid, then traced the ivory keys. The scent of dust and old wood mingled with the orchids. With a trembling breath she lifted the fallboard. The keys gleamed like teeth in the moonlight. She sat on the plush, slightly worn bench, the leather cool beneath her. For a long moment, she just stared at the keys, the silence of the conservatory pressing in. Then, tentatively, her fingers found the notes. Not a complex sonata, not a gala-worthy piece. It was a simple, haunting folk melody, one her grandmother had sung while preserving apples, a tune woven into the fabric of her childhood, of the orchard's soul. The wildflower waltz. Her fingers were stiff at first, unused to the piano's responsive touch, the sound hesitant, thin in the large space. But as the familiar melancholic notes filled the conservatory, something loosened within her. She closed her eyes, letting the music flow, pouring her confusion, her longing, her deep connection to the earth and the man who threatened and saved it, into the simple tune. The sound was raw, unpolished, filled with a yearning purity utterly alien to the Elysian's curated perfection. It echoed softly against the glass, a secret lament, a wildflower's song in the heart of the mausoleum. Silas Thorne hadn't intended to seek escape. The gala was a necessary function, a performance he executed flawlessly. But the walls felt like they were closing in. The relentless press of people, the hollow congratulations, the weight of his own carefully constructed existence. It became a physical pressure behind his ribs. He needed silence. He needed air. He remembered the old conservatory, rarely used for events, a forgotten corner. He slipped away from the industrialist, ignoring the questioning glances, moving with purposeful strides through the thinning crowd near the ballroom's periphery. He pushed open the heavy oak door to the conservatory, the cool green-scented air a balm, and then he stopped, frozen. The music hit him first, not the orchestra's polished strains, but something fragile, hauntingly beautiful, achingly out of place. It wove through the moonlit foliage, a thread of pure, untamed emotion. His gaze swept the room, landing on the figure at the piano. Nicole. Moonlight silvered her profile as she leaned over the keys, her eyes closed, lost in the melody. Her expression was unguarded, vulnerable, etched with a depth of feeling he'd never witnessed on her before. The defiant spark, the wariness, the confusion, all stripped away, revealing the raw beating heart beneath. She played with an innate grace, the simple tune transformed by her touch into something profound, something that bypassed his defenses, and spoke directly to the hollow core he'd spent a lifetime ignoring. He saw the girl from the orchard, not just the waitress, not just the woman he desired with a terrifying ferocity, but the essence of her, pure, grounded, achingly real, playing a lament for a world he was designed to consume. He stood rooted in the shadows near the door, the carefully constructed walls of his fortress, crumbling brick by brick. The sight of her, the sound she created in this forgotten space, was a revelation. It shattered the last vestiges of his resolve, the final barriers he'd erected against the consuming force of his own desire. Control evaporated, leaving only a raw primal need. The slow burn ignited into an inferno. He didn't think, he moved. His footsteps were silent on the tile as he crossed the moonlit space towards her. The music faltered, the last note hanging in the air, fragile and exposed, as she sensed his presence. Her eyes flew open, wide and startled, reflecting the moonlight like pools of storm-gray water. She froze, her hands hovering over the keys, her breath catching audibly. He stopped mere feet away. The air vibrated with the silence that followed the music, thick with the weight of weeks of tension. The orchard visit, the corridor, the apple, the anonymous payment, the storm, the penthouse. Years of suppressed emotion, loneliness, and forbidden longing crackled between them, a current so strong it threatened to arc across the space. No words, none were needed. The mask was gone, utterly. His eyes, usually glacial, burned with an intensity that stole her breath. They held hers unflinching, revealing a depth of hunger, vulnerability, and absolute terrifying surrender. He took the final step, closing the distance. His hand, large and trembling slightly, a tremor she'd never seen in him before, rose. He didn't grasp, didn't demand. He cupped her cheek, his touch achingly gentle, cool skin against her flushed warmth. A silent question, a plea. Her own resolve, meticulously built on fear and self-preservation, dissolved like mist under the sun. The defiance, the confusion, the resentment, they melted away under the searing honesty in his gaze, under the gentle pressure of his hand. This wasn't the controlled king, or the predatory billionaire. This was the man beneath the fortress, the man who'd been as lost and lonely as she was, the man whose hunger mirrored her own. The gravity pulling them together was undeniable, inevitable. She leaned into his touch, her eyes never leaving his, a silent, devastating answer. The kiss wasn't gentle, it was a collision, a conflagration, a dam bursting after months of relentless pressure. His other arm encircled her waist, pulling her flush against him, off the piano bench, and into his solid strength. Her hands flew to his shoulders, gripping the fine wool of his tuxedo jacket, anchoring herself as the world tilted. His mouth claimed hers with a desperate, consuming intensity that stole her breath and ignited her blood. It wasn't the anonymous hunger of the storm. This was recognition, possession, surrender. It was the taste of whiskey and desperation, the scent of sandalwood and orchids and him flooding her senses. It was the low groan that vibrated in his chest, a sound of raw relief and unleashed need. It was her own whimper against his lips, an answering surge of desire so potent it obliterated thought. The kiss deepened, frantic, searching. His hands moved, one tangling in the hair at her nape, dislodging pins, the other splayed possessively against the small of her back, pressing her impossibly closer. Her fingers slid into the cool silk of his hair, holding on as the kiss threatened to unravel her completely. The controlled precision, the icy restraint, all gone, incinerated in the heat of this moment. He kissed her like a man starved, like a man drowning, and she met him with equal fervor, pouring weeks of pent-up tension, confusion, and undeniable attraction into the searing connection. The conservatory, the moonlight, the distant gala, all faded into insignificance. There was only the feel of his mouth on hers, the solid heat of his body, the frantic beat of his heart against hers, the intoxicating scent of his surrender. The resolve hadn't just shattered, it had vaporized. Time lost meaning. It could have been minutes or hours. When they finally broke apart, gasping for air, their foreheads resting together, the world rushed back in slow, disjointed fragments. The cool glass of the conservatory walls, the scent of orchids, the muffled strains of the waltz from the ballroom. His breathing was ragged, harsh in the quiet space, matching the frantic rhythm of her own. His arms still held her tightly, as if letting go would mean losing her again. She could feel the tremors running through his powerful frame, not cold, but the aftershock of seismic surrender. His eyes, when she dared to look into them, were dark, dilated, stripped bare. The fortress lay in ruins. He looked shattered, transformed. Nicole, he breathed, her name a rough caress against her temple, a benediction, a confession. His thumb traced the curve of her cheekbone, a gesture of bewildered reverence. She couldn't speak. Words were impossible. She lifted a trembling hand, tracing the sharp line of his jaw, feeling the tension there, the unfamiliar vulnerability. Her touch seemed to break something else within him. A shudder ran through him. He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch for a fleeting moment, a silent admission of dependence that was more potent than any declaration. The distant chime of a clock, marking the hour, echoed faintly. Reality, cold and sharp, began to seep back into their moonlit sanctuary. The gala wasn't over. He was expected back. She was staff. He opened his eyes, the vulnerability still there, raw and exposed, but now overlaid with a dawning fierce possessiveness. His gaze swept over her face, kiss-swollen lips, flushed cheeks, hair tumbling free. "You," he started, his voice still rough, struggling. "That music. You." He shook his head slightly, words failing him. He saw the awareness of their situation dawning in her eyes, the flicker of fear returning. His grip tightened almost imperceptibly. "Not here," he murmured, the command returning, but softened, urgent. "Not like this." He glanced towards the door leading deeper into the hotel's private areas, away from the ballroom, away from prying eyes. His meaning was clear. His sanctuary, the penthouse, panic warred with the lingering heat of the kiss, with the terrifying pull towards him. Going back to the penthouse, it felt like stepping into the heart of the storm willingly, but the taste of him was still on her lips, the feel of his surrender imprinted on her skin. The slow burn had erupted, and the fire was all-consuming. Fleeing now felt impossible, surrendering felt terrifyingly inevitable. He saw the conflict. His hand slid down her arm, lacing his fingers through hers. His touch was grounding, possessive, a silent promise and a plea. "Nicole," he said again, her name anchoring them both. "Come with me." The choice was stark, immediate. Return to the gala, to her role, to the suffocating pretense, or follow the wildfire they'd ignited, step back into the gilded cage, knowing this time it wouldn't be anonymous, knowing this time it would change everything. Looking into his eyes, seeing the shattered king, holding on to her like a lifeline, feeling the undeniable current that had pulled them together since the first whiskey, and the scent of apples, Nicole made her choice. She tightened her fingers around his, a silent answer, a surrender to the inevitable collision. He didn't smile, but the fierce, possessive light in his eyes intensified. He raised their joined hands, pressing a kiss to her knuckles, a gesture startlingly tender and utterly proprietary. Then,
Without a word, he led her away from the moonlit piano, away from the haunting melody, through a discreet door hidden in the foliage, and into the private corridors of his domain. The gala's music faded, replaced by the echoing silence of the service hallway, the soft chime of the private elevator, summoning them upwards, towards the apex of his world, towards the unknown heart of the consuming fire they had unleashed. The transformation wasn't just his. It was theirs. The wildflower was walking into the lion's den, hand in hand with the lion who had willingly laid down his crown.
Chapter 4. The private elevator ascended in a silence thick with the aftershocks of the conservatory. The mirrored walls reflected fractured images. Silas Thorne, his tuxedo jacket askew, hair disheveled by Nicole's fingers, the mask of icy control obliterated, replaced by a raw, almost dazed intensity. Nicole, her uniform dress rumpled, lips swollen from the desperate kiss, hair tumbling free, her storm-gray eyes wide with a tumultuous mix of terror, exhilaration, and the dawning realization of what she'd just agreed to. The scent of orchids clung to them, mingling with sandalwood, champagne, and the potent electricity of their shattered resolve. His hand, large and warm, still clasped hers with a grip that was both possessive and anchoring, as if she might dissolve if he let go. The doors opened directly into the penthouse foyer, the vast minimalist space, usually radiating sterile calm, felt charged with the energy they brought with them. The city lights glittered far below, indifferent witnesses. Silas didn't pause. He led her through the living area, past the sleek furniture that suddenly felt less like sculptures and more like obstacles, towards the hallway leading to the bedroom. His stride was purposeful, yet there was a new urgency, a lack of his usual measured precision. He wasn't escorting, he was claiming. He pushed open the bedroom door, releasing her hand only to turn and face her fully within the sanctuary. The enormous bed, pristine and coldly inviting, dominated the space. Moonlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, painting silver stripes on the cool concrete floor. The silence here was profound, amplifying the ragged sound of their breathing. He didn't reach for her immediately. He stood before her, his gaze sweeping over her face, her disarray, with a look of profound wonder and undisguised hunger. "Wildflower," he murmured, the name rough, unfamiliar on his tongue, yet resonating with a depth the impersonal Miss Finch never could. His hand lifted, not to pull her close, but to gently trace the line of her jaw, his thumb brushing the corner of her kiss-swollen lips. The touch was reverent, exploratory, as if confirming she was real. "You played a requiem for my soul." The vulnerability in his voice, the stark honesty, undid her further. The fear receded, replaced by a surge of tenderness that shocked her. She lifted her own hand, covering his where it rested against her cheek. Her fingers trembled slightly. "It was just a song," she whispered. His eyes, dark and fathomless in the moonlight, held hers. "No," he countered, his voice low, resonant. It was sunlight breaking through permafrost. He leaned in slowly, giving her time to retreat, but her body swayed towards him instinctively. This kiss was different, not the desperate collision of the conservatory, but a slow, deep exploration, a claiming that was also a surrender. His arms encircled her, pulling her tightly against the solid wall of his chest, one hand cradling the back of her head, fingers tangling in her hair. The taste of him, whiskey, mint, and something uniquely Silas, flooded her senses. The controlled king was gone. In his place was a man laid bare by desire, his need for her a palpable force. They didn't speak. Words were superfluous, inadequate vessels for the current arcing between them. His hands, surprisingly gentle despite their strength, explored the planes of her back, the dip of her waist, learning her contours through the thin fabric of her uniform dress. Her own hands slid beneath his open tuxedo jacket, feeling the heat radiating from his body through the fine cotton shirt, the powerful muscles of his back bunching under her touch. Each brush of skin, each shared breath, was a revelation, a silent conversation that spoke of months of suppressed longing finally unleashed. He undressed her with a deliberate slowness that was its own form of exquisite torture, his gaze devouring each newly revealed inch of skin, as if memorizing sacred text. The cool air of the penthouse raised goosebumps, instantly soothed by the heat of his hands, his mouth trailing fire down her neck, her collarbone. When she stood before him, bathed in moonlight, he stepped back for a moment, his eyes dark with awe. "God, Nicole," he breathed, the raw admiration in his voice more potent than any compliment. "You undo me." He shed his own clothes with efficient grace, revealing the powerful sculpted body she'd only felt hinted at beneath the tailored suits. The sight stole her breath, the controlled strength, the faint scars hinting at a past beyond boardrooms, the undisguised evidence of his desire for her. He closed the distance again, skin meeting skin, a jolt of pure sensation that made her gasp. His arms wrapped around her, lifting her effortlessly, carrying her the few steps to the vast bed. He laid her down amidst the cool, impossibly soft linen, following her down, his body covering hers, a warm protective weight. This time, there was no anonymity, no storm-fueled desperation. It was a conscious, consuming joining, slow, intense, a profound exploration of each other. Every touch, every sigh, every shared glance in the moonlight was laden with meaning, with the terrifying depth of the connection they'd unleashed. The silence was filled with the language of gasps, of whispered names, of skin sliding against skin, of the rhythmic creak of the bed, as their bodies moved in a perfect wordless understanding. The fortress walls lay in ruins, not just around Silas, but around Nicole's own guarded heart. She surrendered not just her body, but the fear, the resentment, the confusion, trusting the raw vulnerability she saw mirrored in his eyes. When the peak came, it was a shared detonation, silent and profound, leaving them trembling, clinging to each other in the aftermath, sweat-slicked and breathless, transformed in the heart of the gilded cage. Dawn crept into the penthouse, painting the cityscape in soft hues of rose and gold. Nicole woke slowly, nestled against Silas's chest, his arm a heavy, possessive weight across her waist. His breathing was deep and even in sleep. She lay still, absorbing the reality. The sterile perfection of the penthouse looked different in the gentle light. The cold marble floor seemed less forbidding. The vast windows framed a world waking up, not just a conquered vista. The scent of sandalwood was still present, but now mingled with the faint, musky scent of their intimacy, and impossibly, the lingering ghost of apples on her skin. She felt anchored, not trapped, but held. The wild flower had taken root in unexpected soil. She shifted slightly, and his arm tightened instinctively, pulling her closer. His eyes fluttered open. For a heart-stopping moment, the old guardedness flickered, the king assessing his territory. Then his gaze focused on her face, and the ice melted, replaced by a warmth, a possessiveness, that sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with cold. A slow, genuine smile touched his lips, transforming his face utterly. "Morning, wildflower," he rasped, his voice sleep-ruined and intimate. "Morning," she whispered, tracing the stubble along his jaw with a tentative finger. The intimacy felt vast, terrifying and utterly right. He captured her wandering hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Regrets?" The question was quiet, but his eyes searched hers intently, a flicker of the old vulnerability resurfacing. She thought of the storm, the orchard, the gala, the piano, the shattering kiss, the consuming night. "None," she said firmly, meeting his gaze. "Only confusion about what happens now. This," she gestured vaguely between them and the opulent room, "isn't exactly my world, Silas." He propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her, his expression serious now, the playful light still present but tempered. "It doesn't have to be," he stated, his thumb stroking her hip bone absently. "Your world, the orchard, it has a vitality this place lacks." He glanced around the pristine room, a hint of distaste finally surfacing. "Perhaps it's time the mausoleum learned to breathe." He looked back at her, a spark of determination in his eyes. "And as for this," he leaned down, brushing his lips lightly over hers, This is our world, we define it. The days that followed unfolded in a series of stolen moments and quiet revolutions. Silas Thorne, the master of control, began to relinquish it, piece by precious piece, within the walls of his penthouse and beyond. He didn't move her in. That felt too much like capture. Instead, she became a constant grounding presence. Her shifts at the Elysian continued, but now they were punctuated by knowing glances across crowded rooms, by the brush of his hand against hers, as he passed her in a corridor, deliberately slowing his pace. Once in the vast echoing lobby, he stopped her as she delivered menus to the concierge. "Miss Finch," he said, his voice carrying just enough to be heard by nearby staff, his tone formal, but his eyes alight with mischief. A moment, he reached out, not for the menus but to gently tuck the persistent stray lock of hair behind her ear. The gesture was shockingly intimate, a public claiming disguised as propriety. Nicole felt her cheeks flame, saw the subtle shock ripple through the watching staff. Silas merely held her gaze, a challenge and a promise in his eyes, before nodding curtly and continuing on his way. The fortress walls weren't just down. He was dismantling them brick by brick in plain sight. The penthouse transformed. It began subtly. Her worn canvas tote bag, previously hidden, now sat openly by the private elevator door. A vibrant, slightly lopsided ceramic mug she'd made years ago, glazed in the blues and greens of a summer sky, appeared beside his minimalist espresso cups. Then, a sketchpad and charcoals materialized on the low glass coffee table, evidence of her restless creativity finding space. One morning, Silas found her standing on the balcony, wrapped in one of his oversized cashmere sweaters, sketching the sunrise over the city. He didn't speak, just brought her a steaming mug of tea, his fingers brushing hers as he handed it over. A silent communion, defiling the minimalist aesthetic. She teased later, gesturing to her sketchpad left open on the sofa. He glanced at it, a detailed study of an apple blossom, starkly beautiful against the white page. On the contrary, he countered, picking up the pad, his gaze tracing her lines. "You're introducing necessary chaos. Life." He looked at her, a slow smile spreading. "My mausoleum is developing a rather pleasing case of wildflowers." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. "Though I must insist you refrain from planting any actual trees on the balcony. The structural engineers would have kittens." Nicole laughed, the sound bright and free in the once silent space. "No apple trees," she promised, stepping closer, "but maybe a potted herb. Basil, perhaps." To offset the formaldehyde, he caught her around the waist, pulling her against him. "Basil," he repeated gravely, nuzzling her neck, breathing in her scent. "Sunshine, earth, and now him. A radical proposition. I'll consult the board." His lips found hers, a slow lingering kiss that tasted of shared amusement and burgeoning intimacy. The banter was a new language, playful and sharp, a testament to their growing comfort. The biggest revolution, however, happened beyond the penthouse. Silas started visiting the orchard, not as the conquering billionaire, but hesitantly, almost awkwardly, like a man learning a new dialect. He arrived unannounced one Saturday morning, not in the black sedan, but driving a surprisingly understated SUV. He wore dark jeans and a simple gray sweater, looking utterly unlike the king of the Elysian. Tom Finch nearly dropped his pruning shears. Silas didn't offer platitudes or business talk. He simply asked Tom, with genuine curiosity, about the different apple varieties. Nicole watched, heart in her throat, as her gruff father, disarmed by the lack of pretension, slowly began explaining the nuances of Honeycrisp versus Cosmic Crisp. Silas listened intently, asking surprisingly insightful questions about soil pH and pollination. He didn't try to help with the heavy work. His presence alone was seismic enough, but he walked the rows with Nicole, his expensive shoes soon dusted with fine dark earth, contaminating the asset. Nicole teased, gesturing to the dirt on his pristine trousers, as they paused under the dappled shade of an ancient Macintosh tree. He looked down, then back at her,
a genuine smile touching his eyes. Merely acquiring a necessary patina. Wildflower, he replied. He reached out, plucking a small unripe apple from a low branch, turning it in his fingers. Besides, he added, his gaze meeting hers, warm and direct, I find I rather like the smell of dirt on my hands. It reminds me of, he didn't finish, but the look in his eyes said it all. He started coming regularly. He brought sophisticated soil testing kits as gifts, not out of condescension, but because he'd researched sustainable practices. He discreetly arranged for a local agricultural expert to consult on pest management, framing it as a business interest in sourcing. The financial security his anonymous payment provided allowed Tom to breathe, to plan, to invest in new saplings. A new energy, a sense of hopeful permanence, settled over the orchard. The Finch family dinners, once tense with worry, now sometimes included Silas, sitting slightly stiffly at the worn kitchen table, listening to Tom's stories, his gaze frequently seeking Nicole's, sharing a private smile. The Elysian, too, began to subtly reflect the shift. The seasonal menu at Celeste prominently featured Finch Orchard heirloom apples and Finch Orchard small batch cider. The lobby, previously adorned only with cold abstract sculptures, now displayed a rotating collection of local Hudson Valley art. And one week, nestled among the landscapes, hung 3 of Nicole's charcoal sketches, a gnarled apple tree against a winter sky, a close-up of rain on a leaf, and a study of work-worn hands holding soil. Silas hadn't asked, he'd simply had Marcus acquire them discreetly from her farmhouse studio. Nicole discovered them during a delivery, her breath catching. There was no plaque, no fanfare, just her art, raw and real, displayed in the heart of his polished empire. It was a silent, powerful declaration. The world outside, however, wasn't blind. Whispers started. A grainy long-lens photograph appeared in a society gossip column. Silas Thorne, unmistakable in his sharp suit, standing close to a woman in waitress attire near the Elysian service entrance. The caption was coy, speculative, king of the Elysian slumming it. Who is the mystery orchard waiter? The word waiter was a deliberate snide jab. Nicole saw it online. A cold dread washed over her. The sanctuary they were building felt suddenly fragile, exposed. She showed it to Silas that evening in the penthouse. He scanned the article, his expression hardening into the old familiar mask of icy control. But then he looked at her, saw the fear in her eyes, and the mask cracked. Vultures, he spat, crumpling the printout. But his anger wasn't directed at the exposure, she realized, but at the potential hurt to her. He crossed to her, pulling her into his arms. Ignore them, Nicole. Their noise means nothing. But it does, she argued, pulling back slightly, her voice tight. It means scrutiny. It means dragging my family into this circus. They'll dig. They'll find the orchard payment. They'll twist it. The beautiful bubble felt threatened. Silas cupped her face, forcing her to meet his gaze. The icy control was gone again, replaced by fierce protectiveness and a steely resolve. Let them dig, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Let them twist. Horizon Holdings was a legitimate investment in a unique agricultural asset. A slight defiant smirk touched his lips. And as for this, he tightened his hold. I don't care who knows I'm involved with the most captivating, infuriatingly talented wildflower in the Hudson Valley. He kissed her, hard and possessive, a counterpoint to the gossip's insinuation. The only circus is the one they're creating. Our world, he stated, pulling back but keeping her close, is right here, and it's no one's business but ours. He handled it, of course, with the ruthless efficiency he applied to hostile takeovers, but with a new motivation: protection. A carefully worded statement from the Elysian Group confirmed a mutually beneficial partnership with Finch Orchard, praising its sustainable practices and unique produce. It mentioned Silas Thorne's personal appreciation for the Hudson Valley's agricultural heritage. It said nothing about Nicole personally, but the subtext was clear. Back off. The vultures, faced with the implacable wall of Thorne's influence, and the lack of salacious details, thanks to Nicole's fiercely private family and the legitimate nature of the business deal, soon found other prey. The storm passed, leaving their world slightly more exposed, but fundamentally intact, and strangely stronger for having weathered it together. Autumn painted the orchard in fiery hues. The air grew crisp, smelling of wood smoke, ripe apples, and damp earth. One pre-dawn morning, Nicole found Silas standing barefoot on the dew-soaked grass at the edge of the west orchard, looking out over the mist-shrouded trees. He wore only the jeans and sweater from yesterday, his hair tousled by the cool breeze. He looked utterly at peace, a stark contrast to the controlled titan she'd first seen. Surveying this land as a potential acquisition, she walked up beside him, slipping her hand into his. His fingers closed around hers instantly, warm and sure. They stood in silence, watching the mist curl around the gnarled trunks, listening to the first birdsong pierce the quiet. The world felt hushed. New. No shoes, Mr. Thorne, she murmured, leaning her head against his shoulder. The structural integrity of your socks might be compromised. He chuckled, a low, warm sound that vibrated through her. A calculated risk, Miss Finch, he replied, squeezing her hand. The sensory payoff is worth it. He looked down at her, his eyes soft in the pearly light. This, he gestured at the misty orchard, the rising sun painting the sky in streaks of pink and gold. This is where the world makes sense. Nicole looked up at him, seeing not the billionaire, not the king of the Elysian, but the man who had shattered his own fortress for her. The man whose cold marble world now held the vibrant chaos of her art, her scent, her love. The man who stood barefoot in her world, finally at peace. Our world, she corrected softly, rising on tiptoe to brush her lips against his. He met her kiss, a slow, tender affirmation. Our world, he agreed against her mouth. The mist swirled around them, the orchard breathed, and the gilded cage was forgotten, replaced by the boundless fertile ground they had tilled together. The slow burn had ignited, consumed, and forged something entirely new, a love as deep and enduring as the roots of the ancient trees, transforming not just their lives, but the very landscapes they inhabited. The king had found his wild flower, and in her untamed soil, he had finally discovered home.